Oh, there we go. Oh, you're in Japan, Emmanuel. Were you always in Japan, or are you visiting? Oh, is the internet cutting earlier? That's no good. Just bear with me a sec here. Alright. So, mercifully, my voice is still intact. That hasn't been attacked so much. I was, feeling like I was suffocating a couple days ago, but membership is cheap here. So we haven't streamed in a couple days. We've got a bunch of stuff we could be going over. I'm only going to go over 2. Thank you, Dr. Tapioca Weasel, for the renewed membership. Much appreciated. So we're going to be looking at 2 things. We're going to be going into a decently long debate that got a little bit shouty, a little bit contentious, between perspective philosophy and destiny on abortion. Nice, chill topic that nobody loses their heads over. And before that, we're actually going to look at something a little far afield from what we've done for a little while, because I'm diving into information theory, and I am in no way actually up to speed on any of the prerequisites, so this will be just kind of interesting. Let me find very quickly the thing we're going to be going over. Shouldn't be super long, won't take up the whole night, but that'll basically be a warm-up before we get into the actual debate. If I'm speaking very low, I'm just trying to keep my voice from going. Let's see here. Oh, yeah, there we go. Brilliant. Okay. Going to add that to the watch playlist, and then we're going to pop that on the screen over here. So we're going to want to be smaller for this, so we're not taking up the whole screen. Where are you? There we go. Okay. Brilliant. So the first thing we're actually looking at is a video by Genetically Modified Skeptic. I don't think I've actually watched anything by him on stream. But he dives into some information theory here, I am given to understand. So we're going to do that. And while we're doing that, we're also going to have Dredge going on in the background. Because I'm digging it. Alright, there it is. That doesn't need to be too big. And boom. Hey Alejandro. Oh hi Titan. Present Sunday meet Dr. Tapioca Weasel, an experimental physicist friend. The incarnation of the mad scientist IRL. Oh brilliant. So you can watch me embarrass myself. That's fantastic. So glad to have an actual scientist here for that. Alright, so without further ado, this is actually a guest video, I'm given to understand. Let me quickly, I think what I'm going to actually have to do is move this over here, and then switch that to the right screen one. There we go, that's better. Beautiful, okay. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is a creationist makes terrible arguments on, Rogan thing. What's the E? J or E? Hang on. I'm drawing a blank here. Brain fog. I'm just going to attribute it to brain fog.
I ended up doing a PhD in origin of life biology within a history and philosophy of science department in Cambridge.
Do you believe in evolution?
I believe in microevolution. I believe that there are real evolutionary processes. I'm skeptical about what's called universal common descent, the idea that all living forms have evolved from one single common ancestor. I happen to be a believing biblical Christian. I believe the Bible's witness. There were reports that he had appeared to many after being resurrected. So there's a whole...
Right, but there's reports of Bigfoot.
There were many early Christians who died claiming to have seen
Bigfoot.
the resurrected Jesus. People
so
do
close.
not give their lives for a factual claim that they know to be false.
A few weeks back, Joe Rogan had intelligent design advocate and Christian apologist Dr. Stephen Meyer on his podcast. I'm not a regular viewer or fan of Joe Rogan, but I did tune into this episode. I thought Joe asked some very interesting questions and clearly tried to gently
Of course, Joe Rogan experience, that's what it is. Brain's not working.
challenge Meyer's ideas in several places. But some of Meyer's points went unchallenged to the detriment of the educational value of the episode. So, my friend John Perry and I decided to take on 2 points Meyer made, which we found both dubious and insufficiently challenged in the episode. John is a professional science educator who works with scientists to produce animated educational videos for classrooms and the general public. You might already know him from his awesome YouTube channels, Stated Clearly and Stated Casually. The guy spends a lot of time explaining the intricacies of evolution, so he's going to take on a claim which Meyer made about the field of evolutionary biology. I'll be back in just a bit to tackle another one of Meyer's claims. First, though, let me ask you guys a question. In these categories, political bias, factuality, and ownership, how would you rate my content? Personally, I'd probably say left political bias, mixed or high factuality, depending on the type of video, opinion piece, or educational, and finally, independently owned. Would you agree? And wouldn't it be helpful to critical thinkers watching if an independent team did publicly rate content in this way? I ask because the main way I consume news content incorporates this rating.
No, we are not giving your crummy commercial limelight. Here we go. Or light. We don't have limelight. Our light has no lime here.
Times, so I highly recommend you try out Ground News too. To check it out and support my channel in the process, click the link in the description or pinned comment. That's ground.news/skeptic to try out Ground News. Okay, sponsorship over. Take it away, John.
All right. The Stephen Meyer, Joe Rogan podcast. Most of what was said on there is actually probably totally fine. Stephen Meyer was talking about his own personal beliefs and his experience with his faith and so on. That's totally fine. Another thing that he did on there was he talked about several unsolved mysteries within the field of evolutionary biology. Again, that's totally fine. There are genuine mysteries, especially surrounding the origin of life. If you watch Stated Clearly animations about the origin of life, I talk about them all the time, these unsolved mysteries. The thing that was frustrating for me and other educators to hear is that he continually said things that are just false. There's a bunch of things we do understand in evolutionary biology that he claims we don't. For example, he claimed that we don't know how new genetic information evolves. We do understand how new genetic information evolves. We first really started getting a grasp of this back in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. We now understand this process extremely well. If you want to learn more about this, I've got an entire series.
What's that paper here? Hang on. Evolution from Fish to Mammals by Gene Duplication. The author of this is Sumo Ono, Ulrich Wolf, I know that name, and Neil Zakin. Okay.
I understand this process extremely well. If you want to learn more about this, I've got an entire series about it on the Stated Clearly channel. How does new genetic information evolve? One of the claims that he made that's relatively new here, or at least it's one that I've never addressed specifically anywhere else, is this claim that he made about a meeting back in 2016.
I attended a conference in 2016 at convened by the Royal Society in London, Royal Society being the oldest and most august scientific body in the world. And it was convened by a group of evolutionary biologists who were essentially dissatisfied with neo-Darwinism, the standard textbook theory that we learn in all high school and college textbooks. And many of them were saying we need a new theory of evolution.
Neo-Darwinism isn't standard in textbooks.
The way Stephen talks about that meeting just dramatically distorts the true nature of that conference. First, I think it's probably worth asking the question, is it normal for scientists to meet and debate the foundational concepts and theories in their specific field of research? The answer to this question is yes. This is a completely normal part of the scientific process. It happens in every field: physics, chemistry, astronomy. Probably the most famous, the most infamous example of this is from back in 2006. It was at the General Assembly of the International Astronomical Union. They debated about the definition of a planet. A bunch of new objects in space in our solar system had been discovered. Some of them were really big, planet-like. And so people were talking about, what's the...
If life didn't evolve from a common ancestor, what's the alternative? Multiple instances of biogenesis seems unlikely. Well, it would be God in this case. So it would be multiple instances of biogenesis, just biogenesis by some kind of divine intervention in multiple different places, unrelatedly, for seemingly no reason. I guess just God's very inefficient, which I guess, as an all-powerful being, he can afford to be, but no.
Best way to think about a planet. How should we actually define what planets are and what planets are not? As a result of those debates, the definition of a planet was changed, and Pluto was demoted from being a planet to being a, quote, dwarf
Lies.
planet. And that made a lot of people very angry.
Pluto's
when
a
scientists
planet.
get together to debate foundational concepts in their fields,
Lies.
things can get obnoxious. Sometimes there's name-calling, there's yelling,
I
often
will
followed by
never give in.
temper tantrums when being interviewed by journalists afterwards. This stuff can look
I'm
extremely
joking.
petty, extremely childish from an outsider's view looking in. But these really are normal parts of the scientific process, and being petty and being childish and being obnoxious, that's a thing that people do, even in very otherwise professional settings. The 2016 meeting that Stephen is referring to was one of these types of conferences. The title of that conference was New Trends in Evolutionary Biology. The entire thing was recorded. You can listen to each talk, including some of the spicy debates in the Q&A sections after each talk, and you can see those
should
over
do
on
that.
the Royal Society's website. Totally free. Now,
Nice.
if you ignore the pettiness in some of those presentations, it's not hard to understand the meat of the issue that was being debated. Those who called for the meeting, they were upset about the field's current obsession with genes. Back in the good old days, scientists were able to learn all sorts of things about evolution without any reference to those pesky gene things. Darwin and his colleagues, they studied evolution by just comparing traits of different organisms, not the genes, just the traits. So this included traits
Sunday, it's just natural selection, what's quote-unquote incomplete, Alan Newton's formalization by 20th century physics. Well, thank you, Manic Jackson, for the $5. Demon Mama hasn't been streaming, so I'm going into withdrawal without a lefty to give money to. Vosh, I guess, but he's got enough. That's true. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think Demon Mom is still traveling. I was traveling recently, which is why everyone around me has COVID, and I technically have a negative on the test, but that makes no sense, and I have symptoms, so I don't know. Weird.
traits found in fossilized critters, living plants, and animals, closely related animals. You compare their different traits and you can kind of piece together how those evolved. A lot of this research was done by studying embryos and especially comparing the embryos of different organisms to each other, the developmental pathways that embryos undergo. In the 1940s, the concept of a gene started to really solidify and become popular among scientists. In the 50s and 60s, when DNA structure was described and the standard genetic code was cracked, the gene took center stage at almost every scientific conference, every conference about biology, and it soaked up almost all the research money available for evolutionary biologists. It captured huge amounts of space in biology textbooks. It eventually even captured the heart of Hollywood with movies like Jurassic Park. Some people nicknamed this rise of the popularity of the gene within the field of evolutionary biology as the, quote, modern synthesis. This is because scientists had supposedly synthesized or smashed together what Darwin and early workers figured out about evolution with what Gregor Mendel and other geneticists learned about genes. This focus on the gene has undeniably led to huge breakthroughs in evolutionary biology, but many of the speakers at that 2016 conference complained that our hyper-focus on the gene had also given us huge blind spots that can be immediately remedied, so they claim, if we
I wonder
simply
if Yama
look
went to that.
again
Hang on,
at
let's see here. So that's new trends in evolutionary biology. Hang on, I want to take a look at something quickly. I wonder if Susan Yama talked to that. New trends in evolutionary biology. Let's see here. Okay. Content. All content. Can we just go to the... That's Royal Society Publishing, I see. Okay, hang on. Biological philosophy. Actually, does he have a link in the description? That might be useful. That would save time. Meeting website with links to all talks. Beautiful. Alright, here we go. Professor Dennis Noble, Nancy Cartwright, Sir Patrick Bateson, John Dupree, Professor Kevin Leyland. Those are the organizers. Who are the talks, though? Let's see. Overview. Oh, it's just going down there. Okay. Where's the stuff? I want to see the recorded audio of the presentations. Here we go. Excelente. Philosophical transactions, life sciences themed issues, biological scientists. Short research and opinion pieces. Okay. Oyama's in her 80s, so it's possible she didn't, but she is still active, is my understanding, and her stuff is fantastic. Anywho, let's press on.
Things like embryology. Stephen Meyer explained none of this to Joe Rogan. Instead, he went on to say the following.
The first
Oh,
talk
thank you,
at
Naomi
that
Chance, I
conference was
appreciate it.
given by Gerd Mueller,
Sorry, clicked the wrong thing. Thank you, Naomi Chance. I really appreciate that.
a prominent Austrian evolutionary biologist,
Dr. Tapioca Weasel, thank you so much for the 5 gifted memberships. I really appreciate that.
and he simply enumerated the 5 major, what he called explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism. And his basic perspective was the mutation selection mechanism does a good job of optimizing or modifying pre-existing forms. It can generate small-scale variation, but it does a very poor job of explaining the origin of those forms.
Now, Gerd Mueller, he did word things sort of similar to the way that Stephen explained there, but if you actually listen to Gerd's entire talk, you realize that with full context, just full context of that talk alone, the meat of Gerd's actual argument is radically different from what Stephen leads you to believe. First off, Gerd does not complain about, quote, neo-Darwinism. In fact, that term, neo-Darwinism,
Good.
it doesn't really have a solid definition. Instead, Gerd complains about
Neo-Darwinism, it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy for it. It's like existentialism, where it's not like a specific domain of philosophy, it's like a mode of philosophy, I suppose. Neo-Darwinism is like that cluster of things. I think it tends to, I'm speaking as a layperson, but my reading is it tends to really highlight sort of gene-centric views and things of that sort, and positions that are kind of downstream from there. So the idea that all of the information is in the gene is the thing that sort of selects and causes mutations, or bears the information that causes mutations and whatnot. It's typically challenged by people who are like, by various types of interactionists. Susan Oyama spends a lot of time critiquing a lot of interactionists because they maintain the gene-environment distinction as 2 alternative causes or sources of information, or causes of change, etc., etc. But like that's a highly specific position. It's not, for instance, like no doubt you'll find like a lot of textbooks that are sort of inflected by a Dawkinsian reading of certain kinds of things. It'll probably be gene-centric in its own way, but it's not going to be taking a hard stance like you'll find in the selfish gene or the extended phenotype. So I think that's kind of ridiculous.
the modern synthesis. And I would argue that
Neo-Darwinism also attempts interdisciplinary nonsense, Darwinist view of society, technology. I don't know if I'd say that. I think that's probably being a little bit unfair. You definitely do see like that kind of thing implied, especially in writers like Dawkins who are a little bit ham-fisted. unfortunately also like pretty insightful and clear, if conceptually fraught. But no, I wouldn't go that far to say that it attempts quote unquote interdisciplinary nonsense. I think there are interdisciplinary implications, and I think all too often a gene-centric view. And I mean, you can take this outside of biology too. Like, how about this? How about even the implied language of something like James C. Scott's seeing like a state. States don't see. States aren't discrete entities. They as soon as you start talking about this particular thing bearing the information or bearing the cognitive capacities or the cognitive functions of some entity, you make it very easy to turn it into a black box that's doing a whole lot of extra work that you may not even realize it's doing in your theory. So it's not especially unrespectable as a position. It's represents some pretty common tendencies in science and theory and philosophy generally, which are generally not great in my opinion, but
That Gerd is actually complaining about a straw man version of the modern synthesis. Some of the things he claims in that talk are pretty silly. If you look at gene sequences only, if you never study how those genes actually go about making three-dimensional bodies in the three-dimensional world, there are certain questions about evolution that seem impossible to solve. These are questions that are actually super easy to solve.
Here, I'll give you an example. This is actually great. So let's go back here a little bit, and I'll show you what I mean.
Man version of the modern synthesis. Some of the things he claims in that talk are pretty silly. If you look at gene sequences only, if you never study how those genes actually go about making three-dimensional bodies in the...
See, that right there, that's a very strange sentence when you actually think about it. Genes are largely inert. And what's sort of implied is that matter and cells and things like that, those things are inert, and it's the gene actually that moves in them. Now, of course, someone like this knows this, but you can really see how the metaphor of the gene making, the gene choosing, the gene selecting, etc., the gene containing information, things like that, that can creep in really fast. And this is one of the reasons why someone like Dawkins ends up drawing basically political and cultural implications from this, because he's essentially loaded that content into the gene metaphorically to make a point, but it's very easy to lose sight of exactly what it is you're doing and the limits of it, and he does.
Three-dimensional world. There are certain questions about evolution that seem impossible to solve. These are questions that are actually super easy to solve when you take embryology into account. As an example of this, he points to a body of research surrounding domestic cats. Wild cats and most domestic...
I've just been gifted 5 memberships by Dr. Tapioca Weasel, who we just learned is a scientist, so I'm going to assume I said something right. Thank you very much.
Cat breeds have 5 fingers, or claws, if you'd rather, on their front paws.
Hang on, this is important. You pull up alongside a boat at anchor. There are signs of life on board, but nobody appears to greet you. Shia LaBeouf. Almost immediately, a small slot in the door snaps open. A pair of frantic eyes peer out at you. Who goes there? Shia LaBeouf. Fisherman. What do you want? I was just checking to see if you're okay. Do I seem okay? No, I am very much not okay. I'm supposed to be delivering this package to Little Marrow, but I am being stalked by Shia LaBeouf. A huge leviathan lurks in these deep waters. I've seen it. It hung in the water, its gaping mouth just below the boat. It would have swallowed this vessel whole if I hadn't bolted for the shallows. I am not going any further into this accursed island chain. I'd better going. Or I could deliver the package to Little Marrow for you. You would? Well, that would work, I guess. Oh, and I've got space. Oh, frabjeste kalukale. Sweet. The courier pushes a lumpy brown package through the door hole. It squelches slightly as you take it in your hands. Dark fluid oozes from one corner. Thank you, stranger. This is bound for the dock worker at Little Marrow. I'm not sure what's inside, but... Listen, I know this sounds crazy. Sometimes I think I can hear the faintest whispers coming from it. Now, I'm not supposed to be transporting live goods. Don't have the equipment for it, so just be careful with this thing. Whatever it is. It's Shia LaBeouf. Here, why don't you take this too? Again, an item emerges from the door hole. This time, a book is pushed through and thuds onto the deck below. You pick it up. I'll be on my way whenever the coast is clear. Safe travels. Alright, sorry about that.
Some cat breeds, however, have 6 fully developed fingers on each paw? How did an entire new finger evolve with muscles and tendons and everything? If you hold a cartoonishly simple gene-based view of evolution, and Gerd suggests in that talk that this is what all biologists think, and it's definitely not what all biologists think. He's being
Good.
hyperbolic here, but
Good,
if you
good,
just
good.
imagine a really
Good. Okay, I like this guy. That's accurate. Good.
stupid biologist who holds a very cartoonishly simple view of
Not that my opinion means anything. I'm in political science, for God's sake, but I know this one. I recognize this.
evolution, that guy, he would probably think that it would require thousands of new mutations to make an entirely new cat finger. Those mutations, this geneticist might think, would have needed to accumulate gradually through careful selection over thousands of generations. Some mutations would involve making new bone structures. Others would be for tendon formation, tendon placement, muscle, claw, skin, and toe pad development, and so on. It might seem to this naive geneticist that breeding for cats with 6 fingers would be a nearly impossible project spanning thousands of years. In reality, because of the way finger development works in mammals, it turns out that all you really need is one mutation.
Thank you for the win all day, gifted for the 5 gifted memberships. Very appreciated.
It changes the timing of paw growth early during embryological development. There are several different mutations we now know can cause this to happen. And when this timing shift is triggered by a mutation, an entirely new finger, so we're talking muscles, tendons, bones, everything, all of that will form automatically as a result. Stephen Meyer quote mines Gerd's talk to make it seem like scientists have no idea how evolution works.
Every time he says GERD, I think he's talking about gastroesophageal reflux disorder.
Gerd did not claim that we are desperate for a
Gastric
fundamentally
reflux
new
disorder.
theory of evolution. Instead, he claimed that
I legit have got brain fog going on.
because discoveries in embryology and several other subfields of research are shedding so much light on how particular traits evolve, he thinks we should rename the modern theory of evolution. Gerd proposed we call it, quote, the extended evolutionary synthesis. Scientists from the
Yes.
audience during that conference agreed with him that things like embryology and plasticity are really important concepts in
Crashed
evolutionary
airplane.
biology, but they're already in our textbooks.
A large man is watching you through the billowing smoke of a campfire, idly carving away at a wooden stake. He stands aside as you pull ashore. It's Shia LaBeouf. Stranger, from that look on your face, I'd say you've encountered the local wretches. Take a seat. You join him by the fire. I've been trying to rid them from this accursed jungle ever since we wrecked here. The boys called them mind suckers on account of them, well, affecting the mind. They made us see things, do things. I'd ask you for safe passage away from here, but not until after I've avenged my squadron. What happened to them? A number of us went down in the fog, crashing into trees or ditching into the water. Those that survived rallied here under the boughs of this giant tree. But it offered us scant protection from Shia LaBeouf. Before help could arrive, our members quickly dwindled, picked off by the fiends and the forest, and Shia LaBeouf. Okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I've met a few would-be rescuers over the years, but none would help me in my fight. Are you any different to the rest? I can help. I figured you'd be up for it. You have the look. Okay. We find the lost pieces of my squadron's mortar. We'll then use that to bombard the beasts. Other planes went down to the north and east where we are now. I'll mark the possible crash sites on your map. You go and see what you can salvage. Sweet. Alright. Tell me about the mind suckers. Devilish creatures through and through. They'll stalk you along the waterways and emerge suddenly, screeching their terrible song. The first time it happened to me, I saw shadows of my squad mates reaching out to me in a feverish dream. When I finally snapped out of it, I was covered in bloodied scratches. They must have sent me running through the foliage. Since then, I've done my best to avoid the fiends. Their senses seem to be based on movement, so move carefully. How will you honor your squad mates? I've hung a few of their dog tags up in the tree behind me. It seemed fitting enough. But I've only got tags from the one's eye. You must understand, I never found all their bodies. If you happen to find any of their dog tags, I could add them to the tree with their brothers. I have a number of mechanical doodads that you might find useful. Here, take this one. In good faith, I'll give you more for each tag you bring me. What is this? Research part. Interesting. Mind suckers. Oh, we already heard that one. Okay. Let's move on.
These things are taught in high school classrooms. Biologists in general already understand them. They see no good reason to rebrand the field of evolutionary biology. Drew, back to you, my friend.
Why did I put John first? That means I now have to follow that. Great. All right, I'm going to try my best. Hopefully you guys enjoy my part too. A few times in the podcast, Meyer made claims about religious psychology. Since psychology was my major
For the win all day, thank you for the 5 gifted memberships. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
in college, and I often discuss psych research in my videos, I'm going to focus on those
I'm liking all
claims.
the green names
We'll
I'm
begin
seeing.
with Rogan asking Meyer a question about how an understanding of the psychological tendencies of humans affects his view of the Bible and its authors.
How do you reconcile with the reality that the Bible was written down, at least, by human beings, and that human beings are generally
rules.
unreliable,
Um,
at least in terms of 100% accuracy, and also inclined to manipulate each other, especially when they're in control of large groups of people, and also inclined to appease the instincts and the desires and needs of their followers. So they create texts that resonate with the people and develop a philosophy that resonates with the people. And if they say that it comes from God itself, especially if it resonates, especially if it makes sense, and maybe perhaps it is in some way from God because it is coming from this divine inspiration. But how do we know?
your question embedded an interesting insight about motivation, that we have confirmation bias, we have all these these things. And in this basic discussion about God between, say, the new atheists who aren't so new anymore and people more on our side of the worldview divide, there's a tendency to point fingers about motivations. Oh, you religious people believe this stuff because it gives you comfort. And the religious argument to the atheist is, so you atheist...
Nestle 20 says, present study, depending on the usage, neo-Darwinism can mean to the Darwinian proponents of the late 1800s, early 1900s, or the synthesis of Mendelian genetics plus selection in the 1940s. When I hear neo-Darwinism, I basically always hear essentially just a gene-centric view. I think that's more or less how it's used now. Maybe that was how it was used then, but...
Materialists, you disbelieve
Although if you're in biology and you know more about this, you can correct me, but this is what I've read.
because it gives you moral freedom. You don't have to be accountable to a moral judge. And I think in each person there's that push-pull. There's motivations to believe, there's motivations not to believe. And one of the benefits of philosophical training is the attempt, at least, to extricate debates from those motivations. You know, that's essentially, they're essentially ad hominem arguments, and try to avoid those as much as possible on both sides.
Meyer is touching on an idea that is important. When speaking to an individual with which you disagree, definitively asserting that their beliefs are wholly explained by biases stemming from their motivations or emotions is reductive. You can't always be certain of that, and it's insulting. The famous Christian theologian C.S. Lewis gave a name to this practice. He called it bulverism, and rightly stated that it can get in the way of productive conversation. With that said, Rogan's question about the Bible was not an exercise in bulverism. Rather, he raised the possibility that known patterns of religious psychology and phenomenology played a role in shaping the Bible, then asked what Meyer thought about that possibility. Meyer's response equivocates this with outright bulverism, and if you watch the episode from this point carefully, you see that Meyer never addresses Rogan's question. Instead, he shifted the conversation toward arguments about the historicity of the Gospels, a topic which Christian apologists have done significantly more work on than religious psychology. There was another false equivalence in Meyer's statement. The claim religious belief is often motivated by comfort, and the claim disbelief is motivated by desire to sin, are not based on equivalent justification. The latter, as a sociological claim, is not empirically supported. Literature in the fields of psychology and sociology, which focuses on reasons people leave Christianity, for example, does not suggest a desire for moral freedom as a motivating factor. In fact, when moral issues do motivate disassociation from Christianity, those moral issues are typically concerned with moral hypocrisy of Christians and having to do the right thing, even at considerable cost. Although, as the article I've been quoting here states, intellectual doubt was a primary motivation for deconversion. Now, Christian apologists typically defend this people disbelieve because they want to sin claim with appeals to theology. They may explain that the scientific literature I've cited misses the fact that disbelievers suppress the truth in unrighteousness, and that even those who honestly believe themselves to doubt Christianity for intellectual reasons may only do so because God has given up their soul or spirit. This enables the person to enter a spiritually blind state where they are unable to recognize that the real reason they disbelieve is their own moral failure. Or put more simply,
there are some people out there who genuinely don't believe God exists because they've suppressed the truth so long that God has given up to their own desires, and they're at the end of Romans 1 rather than the beginning. They've lost the capacity to recognize God exists because God knows they're never coming back and he has given them up.
I've made a whole video responding to this claim, by the way. It's linked in the cards and description. You might see the issue here. When we involve concepts which can't be tied to empirical observation or which are infinitely powerful or malleable in definition, concepts like the soul, spirit, and God, study through observation becomes impossible. With these concepts in play, anything we've ever observed can be made to fit a prior conclusion, and any model of the thing we're trying to study, in this case the psychological process, becomes impossible to test and therefore meaningless. Theological concepts like these cannot be invoked to defend a claim about observable phenomena without making explanatory models of observable phenomena absurd or useless. Okay, what about the claim religious belief is often motivated by comfort? Does that find empirical support in the literature? To a significant degree, yes. I've made a video previously which explores this in greater depth, so I'll link that in the description and show you a brief clip here. In their book, Sacred and Secular Religion and Politics Worldwide, political...
Oh, that's right, Nestle. Yeah. No, that's totally correct. So another thing, sort of under the umbrella of neo-Darwinism is... Neo-Darwinism, not neo-Darwinianism. Neo-Darwinism is adaptionism. The view that everything is an adaptation, e.g. evopsych, which is continuous with sociobiology, which is... similar, actually.
Political scientists Pippa Norris and Ronald Inglehart develop a theory of existential security as it relates to religious belief and practice.
Okay, I think we got.
They suggest that religion.
We get the idea. I'm not really interested in the religious takes. I just wanted to know about that. I do want to look though at Stated Clearly's videos on genetic information.
Stated Clearly presents. How does new genetic information evolve? Segment 1, Point Mutations.
Going insane. It's not good.
In our previous films, we learned that genetic information contained within a stretch of DNA or RNA called a gene, helps determine the size, shape, and even the behavior of a living creature. Humans have over 20...
So even there, like... we know that the composition of DNA, like the structure of DNA, is like crucial to development. But to say that the information is contained within it is itself philosophically question-begging in a big way, which is not to really counter anything that he's saying here, like factually, but just in terms of the overall framing. Like, what is information in the first case? That language is used in ubiquitously in biological speak, but what does it actually refer to? One of the things that's really interesting about Ayama, and one of the reasons why I'm making so much use of her here, I'll pull the book out, and why I'm interested in information theory is precisely because where you locate the information, therein is going to lie the causal and form-giving force for any kind of thing. If you locate the information in the gene, then the gene starts to take on a cognitive function. It starts to be the thing that gives form. And form is not something, for instance, that comes down the line from, how DNA has stuff done to it and does things to it, like the interaction with the cell's interaction with the environment. Like, where is the information? Like, what is information in the first place? It's something about how a process will proceed. Something that determines how a process will proceed, something that contains sort of the what we would understand as data about the thing if we were to represent it on paper. But that's going to be entirely that's going to be radically dependent upon the situation. For example, like which genes are activated. is going to be dependent on, or if any, is going to be dependent on a particular context, a particular stage of development, given certain types of nutrients and whatever abundance or whatever scarcity, things of that sort. So to say that the information is located in the gene is a little bit strange, because it gives the impression that the gene is like a floppy disk and it has like a program on it, but that's not strictly speaking true. It's not that simple. In this context, information means blueprint. Yeah, but that's precisely the problem. See, a blueprint is essentially a top-down model for the structure of the whole, but that's not actually how DNA works. It's not how the gene works. It's not... Yeah. So it's a bit more messy than that. This is one of the reasons why there are interactionist accounts competing with this type of approach, because what they will emphasize is precisely the role of the specific environment and specific contexts and a whole bunch of different little things that are equally a part of the developmental process of an organism and an equal part of the process of giving it form and of determining its form.
1,000 genes which tell our cells how to build and maintain our bodies. The information needed to build a person is obviously different than the information needed to build a mushroom. Biologists, however, tell us that all living things on Earth, including people and mushrooms, evolved from an ancient common ancestor, a relatively simple creature with far less genetic information than the plants, animals, and fungi alive today. If this is true, how did all this new genetic information evolve? We don't yet know for sure how the very first genes came about, but through careful genetic studies of living things in the wild, in the laboratory, and even in our own backyards, we've discovered many ways in which new genetic information evolves today. In this film, we'll look at the simplest mechanism, point mutations. A point mutation is any change that only affects a single pair of nucleotides or letters in the genetic code. They often occur when cells are reproducing. They appear to be mostly random,
Evil birds.
and they're surprisingly common. Current studies suggest that in humans, every child born has roughly 70 unique point mutations. Most mutations are completely neutral, but if one happens to land in a sensitive spot of genetic code, it often has a negative effect on a creature's ability to survive and reproduce. Natural selection usually takes care of these negative mutations by
Sunday, do you still have contact with Kevin Bird? I think I probably do. I could probably get him back on at some point.
simply removing them from the gene pool. On rare occasions, beneficial point mutations occur. While the changes they make aren't quite as extreme as what we're used to in the movies, incredible changes have been observed. Researchers in the lab of Dr. Richard Lenski have observed and documented hundreds of mutations in bacteria. One of these, for example, was a beneficial point mutation found in a strain of E. coli. An A from its code was simply replaced with a T.
Sunday, stated clearly, his example is sufficient for high schoolers, but if you want something more comprehensive, I recommend Johannes Jaeger's Modeling Developmental Systems, Part 2, Find to Limbs. Is that a YouTube video or is that a book or an article? I'm interested, but I asked because he's a biologist, he'd be useful to talk about this. Yeah, probably. No, it's a good idea. I'll hit him up at some point.
T. Those who carried the mutation were able to reproduce faster than normal in the lab. In less than 1 year, they outcompeted and caused the complete local annihilation of their non-mutant siblings.
That was funny.
Back in 1976, 2 scientists reported a strange mutation in Salmonella that occurred in one of their labs. Their work was recently evaluated by Dr.
I don't know how plausible this is, but Dawkins actually has a really interesting, and it's probably plausible, I don't understand the mechanism fully. But Dawkins has an interesting hypothetical for how the first pre-gene selectors, I think is the word, or self-replicators, that's it. The first pre-gene self-replicators could have come to be, and what they would be is you'd have molecules inside the primordial soup, and they would bond with things, and they would create, it would alter how they bond with other things, and eventually the building blocks would become scarce because all of these bonds would start to form, and so you would have, these molecules that are competing for scarce resources, and there would be molecules that are more successful at replicating themselves or at simply persisting and existing simply because they had a shape that either like collected more things, or they had a structure that didn't make it so that when they encountered another molecule, they weren't assimilated or dissembled, so that you have like a sort of potential rudimentary ancestor of like a cell membrane. Thank you for the win all day, for the 5 gifted memberships. Really appreciate that. Feeling the regret of not pursuing biology? So am I, but it's never too late. Think about it, like realistically, even if you're like mid-40s, 50s, whatever, people become fantastic in biology in the span of 3 to 5 years is typically what it takes to get to a master's. You can start now. There's nothing stopping you. I would strongly, like, think about it. 5 years from now, you could have more than passing understanding of the field. I think if you pursued it hard, I think it's worth doing if you have a passion for it.
Dr. Michael Behe, who classified their discovery as a rare gain-of-function mutation. The mutation gave these microbes the
I'll give that a look,
ability
Nestle.
to
Thank you for
detect
the
and then eat a rare
thanks for
sugar
the
called
recommendation.
D-arabinose. Microorganisms are interesting, but what about larger, more complex animals?
They're boring.
Can simple mutations give them new features too?
Mm-hmm.
Most domestic dogs, and their wild relatives, gray wolves, have fairly short fur. Some dog breeds, however, have extremely long fur. By carefully studying the genetic code of over 700 dogs, and then comparing their DNA to that of wolves, scientists discovered a single point mutation on a gene called FGF5. This point mutation, which simply changed a G to a T, is largely responsible for the long fur found in dozens of dog breeds, including the Shih Tzu, the Collie, and the Pomeranian. But what about wild plants and animals? Can they
Back to
undergo positive
civilization.
point mutations as well? Cane toads and their relatives produce a milky toxin in a gland behind their ears that kills almost any animal that tries to eat them. If you could zoom in to see the surface of a cell inside an animal's body, you would find tiny protein structures that act like pumps embedded in the cell's membrane or skin. These protein pumps move electrolytes in and out of the cell. Toad toxins work
Why no Irish setter? Mr. Burns got to them already.
by attaching to and clogging these pumps, wreaking havoc all throughout a creature's body. Dr. Nicholas Casewell and his colleagues recently found that several different kinds of animals, lizards, snakes, and even hedgehogs, have all independently undergone small point mutations which modify the shape and stickiness of their transporter proteins. As a result, toad toxins fail to attach, meaning that these mutants are now immune to the poison. So to sum things up, point mutations are an excellent source of new genetic information for a population. Dog populations of the past, for example, only had information for growing short fur. Thanks to a point mutation, they now have information to make pups with short fur or long fur. It's important to note, however, point mutations do not usually increase the total amount of information in the genetic code of an individual. Instead, they edit what's already there, meaning that for the individual, when new information is gained, old information is lost. In our next film, we'll look at a special type of mutation called a duplication event. These mutations dramatically increase the length
Our next
of the genetic
film,
code,
like how he calls
and
his
can
YouTube
even give
videos
rise
films.
to entirely new genes. Until then, I'm John Perry, and these were just a few simple examples.
Not anymore, you're not. I need to press the button. Okay. I'm going to go grab some coffee, and we're going to do the Destiny debate. which will probably suck, let's be realistic, but, you know. I put it in the title, we have to. Actually, it's perspective philosophy versus Destiny, so it might not actually be terrible. I've got a pretty dim view of perspective philosophy, but I am curious what provoked this. Here we go. This is on Tom's Foolery channel, oddly enough. I don't know how on earth he managed to swing this, or why. But, only 604 views, huh? I guess Destiny doesn't have the carry he used to. Okay, I'm gonna be right back. Sorry, you can't see what I'm looking at. There we go. I'm gonna grab coffee. You people chill in the meantime. And when we get back, we'll go over this. Alright, we're back. Shy surprise. Perspective philosophy isn't fun to watch for me because he's a total sophist. He talks a lot but says very little. Legitimately, he's totally incoherent most of the time. That's been my experience. Just not a nice person either. Destiny can at least string a thought together. Destiny's got moments. Destiny is significantly more coherent than perspective philosophy. The main reason is because Destiny is not generally trying to wrangle material that he doesn't fully understand to leverage for an argument. Perspective philosophy does that, and I'm sympathetic because anybody who's like read something and thought, "Oh wow, this is like really mind blowing," it changes how I looked at everything, and you try to like leverage that in a conversation, all of a sudden you realize, oh, well, this is hard actually. I thought I got it, but this is really difficult to actually talk about in real time. So. Sirius says, you say a lot that DNA doesn't contain blueprints, but what if blueprints also aren't blueprints? What if it's interactionism all the way down? Actually, that's the thing. There's a critique of interactionism as well, or a lot of forms of interactionism in that. It's construed as an interaction between two things, two distinct sources of information, and as a consequence of this, you've actually just replicated the cognitive causal gene, as Ayama calls it, both in the environment and in the gene as well. And so you haven't really escaped. So. What is interactionism? Interactionism is the idea that instead of the development of an organism and its evolution and whatnot being caused by the genes or being caused by the environment, it's caused by an interaction between them. That's basically it. Some examples off the top of my head. I think Midgley is an interactionist. Lewinton is an interactionist. Ayama is an interactionist, but is also a critic. A lot of interactionists. One other book that I'm starting, and I have to like relearn a bunch of early college math to get through it. But somebody gifted this to me, and I'm so grateful because it's impossible to find. It's been out of print for a long time. It is Lila Gatlin's Information Theory and the Living System, and you can tell just by looking at it what decade that was made in. But yeah. I'm going to grab some water as well as coffee. Give me one sec. The dry mouth from this is just awful. All right. Let's update the title here so people know what they're getting in for. And let's get into it. Hey, buddy, what's up?
Hello.
Yep. Your mic's
Hey.
quiet.
Oh, my mic's quiet.
Oh, look at his
Actually-
face.
That's okay. It's better.
Oh, that
You
is,
sure?
he's not happy.
Is everything fine? I'll turn.
He is not happy.
Right, that's
Whoops.
great.
Hold on.
Well,
Are Destiny and Perspective Philosophy on bad terms? I thought they had a good conversation last time. You seem to have like a pretty amicable thumbnail and everything. But now it looks like... Oh yeah, exactly. Lewinton's fairly sophisticated. Ayama is very well disposed towards Lewinton. No, but seriously though, is I was under the impression Perspective Philosophy and Destiny were on decent terms. This is this does not look like it's off to a good start. He looks surprised about this conversation happening.
How did he get in here? It's going to be a vegan debate. Oh,
How did he get in
God.
here?
but
Oh, I think I missed an episode. Are they on bad... They're on bad terms for some reason.
yeah, thanks for the invite, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think Steven's screaming and yelling at his audience right now. So
Sorry, hold on.
Oh.
Some guy did about digging trenches.
Jesus.
they take their trenches very seriously in that community.
There's a lot of trench digging extravagance going on at the minute, isn't there, with Wagner and Ukraine and all that anyway, so.
True.
What?
So yeah, well, thank you for the
Oh,
conversation.
that was so cringy.
Really quite unexpected. I'm happy to have the opportunity.
So
How have you been?
Sorry.
originally, real quick, the plan was that we were just gonna have a panel where we were gonna talk about, like, every Tuesday we go over like everything that's happened over the last week. A bunch of different content creators jump on. A bunch of people wanted to talk about the whatever podcast debate that Destiny had. So that was scheduled for 9 o'clock tonight. I invited Destiny to come on and have the conversation as well, but he wasn't able to make it. Wanted to make it earlier, and so this is who all could make it earlier today. It turns out to be a little bit odd when, I guess, I'm pro-life. He's a freaking vegan. Destiny's.
Sirius says, I don't think they're on bad terms. I think this is a call-in of some kind, and he's exasperated because he hates debating vegans. I guess. Debate if it could be a bit louder. Here, I'll turn it up.
Very pro-choice and bases that off of consciousness. So I figured we could at least like start talking about the consciousness part first, and then maybe just see where it goes from there, because I feel like you two are pro-choice, so I feel like I'm gonna be the
here, you know what I
odd
can
man
do? I'm gonna
out
turn
here, so
my-
might
Oh,
just
I'm not
I'll turn my volume down a little bit so it's more balanced. There we go. Okay.
pro-choice.
Oh, you're not pro-choice.
Oh,
Oh.
no.
Oh god, no, he's a
No,
Catholic.
if anything, I'm closer to pro-life. But like, I'm a sentientist, so I'm somewhere in between, really. So, yeah, I think we're actually kind of a good mix, because we probably
here I
represent
go.
the entire spectrum in a way, which is characteristic of various viewpoints. So, I mean, obviously you've got your sort of you two on the far extremes, and then I would call for a severely lessened, like a lower barrier to abortion, or rather,
What's going on, Echo? How you doing?
lower cut off for abortion. Maybe even as low as 8 weeks, depending on where research goes. But 13 weeks, 11 to 13 weeks.
11 to 13 weeks, damn. Okay, yeah, I'm like end of first trimester. Like, I base it off of being human and being alive. Having a heartbeat and brain function is when we consider you dead. Or if you don't have a heartbeat and brain function, we consider you dead. So I think once you have a heartbeat and brain function, we consider you alive. So as long as you're human and alive, I think that we give you that value. So mine's like, yeah, first trimester, end of first trimester. And then Destiny, what was yours again?
Mine is as soon as I think you have a conscious experience.
And that happens between 18 to 22 weeks, is that?
Between 20 to 28.
As soon as you have a conscious experience. What is a conscious experience? You're gonna need to define that, buddy.
8 weeks, so I just say stop at 20 weeks.
Stop at 20
Because
weeks.
I
Okay.
think like the main difference is how we're even approaching what consciousness is, and I think that's probably the best way to like to see how this is like how we're categorizing it. I think Destiny, if I'm correct, like I don't. Do you want? Is it better I call you Stephen or Destiny? By the way, I still don't know whether to. Is it
Either one
or?
is fine. Okay.
Either one's fine. Okay. So I think Stephen wants to say that it is cortex development, that the sort of right parts of the brain start communicating, and now we have the first emergence of human consciousness. Would you? The question is, would you say that it was conscious before that, and it wasn't a human like level of consciousness, or is it like? Because I think you want to say that it just wasn't conscious, and then it becomes conscious, right?
Yeah, it wasn't conscious and then it becomes conscious.
Right. And like to clarify, I think that that's not exactly the best way of approaching it. I think from what we've seen in terms of the evidence that we have, the only reason that we would really attribute cortex development to consciousness is based off a few different sort of presuppositions in the field that have since been questioned quite radically. one such basically presupposition is that higher functions are
Make a poll? Alright, like on what? Hang on. Let's see. Favorite philosophy weirdo. Well, I don't like philosophy weirdos, so I wouldn't be able to list very many.
necessary for
I'll think of
conscious
something.
experience.
I'll think of something.
Where there seems to be neurological experiments, sort of freak cases that show the alternative, where people have lost large parts of their brain but appear conscious, or they've had their brain severed.
Oh, okay, fine,
you know, in the
fine,
sense like in
fine, fine. Okay, hang on. Favorite philosophy weirdo. Blame Ico. Perspective philosophy. There's okay. REM. Logo data lists. Who else? Who's another one? Who's a weird one? Shoot. I'm drawing a blank. Oh, Cosmic Skeptic. There we go, that'll do. That'll do.
the split brain experiments, and there seems to arise two distinct conscious experiences.
Ours isn't a philosophy,
or
bro. It's
possibly
something
two
else.
distinct conscious experiences. You know, there's also how we collect and understand
No good people? There's no good people in here. What are you talking about? REM is like contextually good.
brain development in the first place. So the reason that we would even attribute sort of consciousness to the human brain is really based off people saying like, all right, you're conscious, right? Like I'm conscious. And then me attributing consciousness to another and then going, okay, well, if we just assume that they're conscious and scan their brain, we can now basically affirm that this is the structure necessary for consciousness. And so the reason that we'll kind of say cortex development is because it has the closest sort of, in terms of development, it's what we would consider a sort of fully operational brain that we're attributing consciousness to. But that's really just based off sort of reports, which are already based off behavioral analysis. So we've already kind of attributed consciousness to the subject before we then ad hoc it to the brain state, or rather the brain structure in the first place. So I'm just wondering why you say 24 weeks, given that sort of issue, like in terms of actually collecting when a being is conscious.
I have never heard in my entire life another proposal for where consciousness comes from other than the brain. The prefrontal cortex, I guess, of the brain.
I mean, no one's even. I'm assuming, like, Tom, do you actually have an issue with consciousness coming from the brain? Or?
No.
So let's all assume we all agree that consciousness emanates from a fully functioning brain, whether it's like whether you're someone as far as Castro, where it's, you know, it's a sort of what's he called it, like a basically detector for consciousness, or a basically a way that consciousness sort of attunes itself and manifests through this metabolized structure, or it's just a straight up physicalist where it's an emergent property, and let's say it's even epiphenomenal, right? It's not even causal. Like either way, we're probably going to affirm it's connected to a brain somehow. The real question is, why are we affirming it's connected to the brain at specifically the point of 20 weeks in cortex development, when behavioral analysis was a prerequisite to the attribution in the first place? So if I've already...
It's favorite, not best. Oh, what did I do? Oh, don't click the me, player. Get up there. There we go.
Affirmed that someone is conscious, and then said, well, this is what a conscious brain looks like. Why can't I just go back to the behavioral analysis rather than strictly base it off this?
Because we could probably imagine a bunch of behavior that would probably be insufficient to establish a conscious experience.
Like what?
Hang on,
Like
I need to catch this again. What on earth did you just say?
Weeks in cortex development, when behavioral analysis was a prerequisite to the attribution in the first place. So if I've already affirmed that someone is conscious and then said, well, this is what a conscious brain looks like, why can't I just go back to the behavioral analysis rather than strictly base it off this?
Because we could probably imagine a bunch of behavior that would probably be insufficient to establish a conscious experience.
Like what?
Like I could create a robot with some rudimentary functions that could mimic certain types of behavior, but I don't know if we would say that that particular thing is conscious.
Why would we say that it's not conscious, though?
Because the faculty needed
hang
to
on, hang on.
process all of...
Wait, you wouldn't go. Those are questions. Those aren't symmetrical questions. So, saying it is conscious, that's a very different thing from saying we don't have any reason to think it is conscious. So if you have like a super hardcore functionalist, like a computer functionalist understanding of mind, you might even think that just the bare fact of running through a program means that there is consciousness there. If you're someone like Chalmers, you might even go so far as to say that, if I understand it correctly, that you have actually, let me see if I do understand it correctly. Give me a sec. Yeah, not consciousness, mind. It's different. Never mind. Never mind. I'm dumb.
All of the higher order things, all of the abstract emergent things that are happening in a conscious experience aren't there. It's just a couple of rudimentary processes that are moving the things
Polls look
from
good.
point A to point B. Unless for you that's enough to say it's a conscious thing because it can move something.
Well, no, I just think it's enough to say that we could start saying that, like, the more complex something like that becomes, like a predictive engine, it could become something capable of passing a Turing test.
What is defined as consciousness? Well, that's the thing. Like, consciousness, we use it metaphorically sometimes to refer to something that is sensitive to something in its environment, that is quote-unquote conscious of, or whatever. Do we mean you have some kind of qualitative experience of a thing, like from a first-person vantage point, sort of analogous to your experience of the screen right now, the kind of raw feels you associate with that, just kind of first-personness? Do we mean simply, like, you see how that gets kind of strange? It's not just an asymmetry; it's a category error. I think the inference is a category error. I don't think the question is necessarily. The problem, though, is that they are separate questions. Like, saying that it is conscious is saying something radically different from saying that you don't have a reason to think it's conscious.
Do you think that all consciousness is the same?
Hold on, wait. I don't think a Turing test has anything to do with consciousness. And then just because something is complicated, I don't know if we would say it's conscious. Like, we can probably think of a lot of complicated things that aren't conscious. Like,
there are some very respectable people who would more or less go that route, who would basically say, like, if you can have like a specific arrangement of virtually anything, you can imitate the computing structure of a brain. You can have a mind that's more or less exactly like the brain it's imitating.
a rock rolling down a hill can take a
I
million different potential paths, or like we can think of a lot of things that are complicated or chaotic that aren't conscious, I would imagine. No,
if you're interested in this stuff, a really fantastic book, which I highly recommend, is John Searle's The Rediscovery of the Mind. Even the first 3 chapters of this, you will get such a good little boot camp on this whole topic. It's great.
Yeah, I would agree, but I think that we would see that the difference is whether they are
what did I do?
Emanating not just
why is it
base
big?
reactions like
There we go.
like the way that a plant or a microorganism would, where it's a set response to stimuli, or whether it's behavior.
Set response to stimuli, a behavior or reaction. Aren't these all?
So I would say that I would say that the difference between like a behavior and a mere reaction seems to be the capacity to
Friends, we have caught
relate
squid.
to one's external
squid.
environment, make problem solve,
Yes.
make a decision, sort of
Yes.
either, I would say, discriminate in
brethren.
relation to one's environment, recognize one's environment, and then make a response in relation to an end goal based off that, what could be a change in the environment. So you would see like,
Yeah, I
I
understand.
don't
I
know.
don't get an example. I understand what you're saying, but couldn't all of these things just be complicated chains of reactions, big if-then chain statements?
Yeah, I mean, but that's what a Pavlovian or a Skinner would say was a human, right? That it was we are a complex behavior.
We can play Doom on lab-grown brain cells, let women have abortions. No, we can play Doom on pregnancy tests. Save the pregnancy tests. It's just a baby.
Behavioral machine, and that consciousness is epiphenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like, I mean, are you a hard determinist?
Oh, yeah.
No, you're not.
And I noticed you brought this up last time in the vegan gains debate, in terms of like, you said like a dog could just be having a Pavlovian response versus a human having like the semantic understanding, meaning the qualitative response. But if you're a hard determinist, at one, I don't know why that would matter, and two, it seems that it seems to be beyond the point. It doesn't, like, the whole point of Father Pavlovian isn't to say that these beings aren't conscious. It's just to say that consciousness as a emergent property would be just essentially a complicated if-then, a sort of pattern recognition system, responding to value structures that were given to it by nature.
It seems difficult to build consciousness out of if-then statements, the experience of consciousness out of just if-then statements. Like, how is my experience right now, my meta-reflection of myself, how is that just if-then statements? That seems hard to...
Well, I would agree. I mean, I'm not the... I would say I'm not a Pavlovian or like a Skinner in the first place, but I think that what they're essentially arguing is that through the relation of external stimuli. So if it's like for example, like, what about would your
What do you mean, no, you're not? He said he is multiple times. Is Destiny a determinist? I thought he was something weirder. Huh.
experience would you say would be too complex for a sophisticated predictive engine? Let's say something
Look,
far exceeding chat
I've got wicked brain fog today. Okay, go easy on me.
GPT, right? Let's say like an order of 100 of something like ChatGPT couldn't essentially project an environment and then react to it based off reserving memory and like a memory reserve, a memory bank of like previous responses, and then building up the complexity of those responses into a lived experience, which would, I mean, surely you could imagine that you would have everything from a psychological continuity.
No, he's a hard determinist? Okay. I guess that checks out with everything else. I would, for whatever reason, in the back of my head, I thought he had room for something a little bit, I don't know, like, I guess more compatibilist?
That you could have a relationship to environment, that you would learn from that relationship to the environment, that your predictions may manifest.
I understand what you're saying,
visceral.
but everything you're doing is a behavioral analysis. I don't think that, like I said, we can create a sufficiently complicated script on a computer to have behavior, but I don't think people would ever feel like a conscious experience arises from the behavior.
I mean, I would agree. I would agree that we would say that we would want to say that language and even behavior itself indicates something other than itself, that is sort of a deeper level, which I think you would call a qualia. I just
Well, not necessarily. There are eliminativists that would say that qualia and such are weird artifacts of just the way we talk about it, the way we talk about these things. That there isn't a thing called mind or a type of thing called the mental that actually bears meaning.
just want to know why you would say that a being which is like, I'd rather that why we would even say that that all of that wouldn't, why the qualia wouldn't come from that anyway. Like it's like for you, it seems like this is a very physicalist approach.
I mean, compatibilism isn't not determinism. It's not hard determinism. Like the... Hang on. I mean, it kind of is a little bit. Let's see here. I might have a wonky understanding of this term. Yeah, because the whole idea behind hard determinism is that you have no meaningful control at all. Like you can have a compatibilism in which your choices are both determined, but you retain freedom. But if you're a hard determinist, there's not really room for freedom. And even then, like I think most compatibilisms are more of like a levels of analysis type thing, where you locate freedom at a different level than you locate the determination.
This is like a very behavioralist form of analysis, in which there's no like sort of spirit or sort of anything other than
I guess,
just...
hold on, to simplify this down, I don't understand. It sounds like you're saying that, like, why can't a bunch of behaviors just be called consciousness? That sounds like the simplified version of what you're saying, right?
No, I'm just saying, like, why can't consciousness emerge from behaviors?
What?
Like, since we seem to basically...
Why can't consciousness emerge from behaviors? I think he's mixing two things up here. So, like, consciousness can obviously emerge from the dynamics of material objects. Unless you're going to make some kind of dualist argument that seems to sort of be something you're kind of wedded to. But it's not... But from behaviors. We don't mean necessarily dynamics when we're talking about behaviors. We could be, but I don't think it's emergent from the behaviors. The behaviors sort of like... That language is weird to me. Like I can see you kind of like stretching that to just mean like activities generally, in which case, like, sure, like trivially, if consciousness is emergent from matter, it's emergent from matter undergoing some kind of activity. But when we talk about behavior, we're typically talking about specifically observable dynamics, observable activities, right? Sunday, compatibilists and determinists should agree on all the facts. Sean Carroll, for example, sees free will as a model, but that in reality everything is determined. Yeah, but that's not really compatibilism, though. That's kind of like saying we'll talk about it as if they're compatible for expediency's sake, but that's not really compatibilistic. If the freedom is illusory, if it's not real, then it's not compatibilism. You've eliminated it, and you're just kind of not acknowledging it.
That doesn't seem to be possible. I can't imagine that without some immaterial thing. Again, I can create rudimentary behaviors with a script that's 30 lines long, but it seems hard to imagine that there's a conscious experience happening there.
But I don't know what, I just think it's sort of like ruling it out in the sense of like we're just saying it's not an intuitive, based on the fact that we are having an experience. But if that experience is essentially just like a behavioral, like I'm not an epiphenomenalist. I just want to point out that even if we did say that dogs are pure Pavlovian, that like we go the absolute like hard materialist Pavlovian way of going about things, I'm just wondering why this is like a dog is just this scripted engine with consciousness, because you said they were conscious, I think. We just said they didn't have our kind of consciousness. And then you have our kind of consciousness. And I'm just trying to work out what that difference is, how it relates to the structure of the brain, and also cannot be detected through a form of behavioral analysis. Because really, that's what we'll have to say. Because otherwise,
wait, what do we have to say this for? Yeah, what are you attributing it for?
Yeah, because otherwise, at 20 weeks, we could say that before 20 weeks, there is significant behaviors that we could start to attribute consciousness to either a non-human or a human level, in your sort of vernacular. And if it's not the behaviors, then the question is, why are we even attributing it to these structures in the first place? Since our recognition of behaviors is how we recognize consciousness in fully formed adults.
But
which we've then.
I don't think we're
used
recognizing
to.
behaviors. I think we're also recognizing like the brain structure like functioning, right? Like for instance, the
Yeah.
behavior of a sleeping person on its face might look similar to the behavior of a dead person. Let's assume we can make the dead person breathe, but we can like hook machines up to a brain and look at like electrical signals and say, oh, it looks like there's activity here, so it's different.
Yeah, I would agree, but I mean, like, why do we attribute, like, for example, the whole point is like, why do we attribute those electrical signals in the brain with consciousness or specific experiences? And it's because we'll take someone when they're sleeping and we'll go, right, they're asleep, they're not dead, they might be dreaming or whatever. In the same way when we look at an animal when it's moving and it's sleeping and we'll go, oh, it's dreaming. And then we'll put them in an MRI scanner, and we'll map out the through magnetic resonance the electrical signals in the brain, and we'll be like, this is the conscious experience of someone they're sleeping. This is how the brain works when someone's sleeping, and there is like dreaming happening here. So it's the same way that we would go, this is a fully conscious individual having an experience of X. Let's scan their brain. Now we have an indication of what's going on in the brain when they're having the experience of X. Like what we're doing prior to scanning their brain is relying upon their reports, and it's kind of an impossible task to get out of, because otherwise, like, look at it like this: we could just assume everyone was a P zombie. Everyone but yourself is a P zombie, a predictive engine which has evolved complex social behaviors in order to survive. They're willing to tell you they're conscious. You scan their brain, you gain the exact same information. Like you just have to trust that. You just have to trust their report. It's because it's basically the hard problem of consciousness.
Okay, I don't. What is the alternative, or what is the?
Thank you for the win all day for the 5 gifted memberships. You are being very generous tonight. I greatly appreciate it.
What is the point of this line of inquiry? I guess I've never thought to think of like maybe consciousness just arises from simple behaviors or whatever. I don't know what the value is, or I don't even know what the point is of this line of inquiry. Like, what are we trying to establish?
The point is why we would basically say, in one case, behavioral analysis in relation to two humans going into a neurological experiment is sufficient to say that consciousness exists prior to the experiment beginning, and as a precedent for the experiment to have any clinical or rather any sort of scientific validity. So like basically you are conscious, let's make an experiment to look at consciousness. And we do that through behavioral analysis. But when it comes to knowing whether a fetus is conscious, we have to rely upon a fully functioning or a fully integrated brain. I just don't see why we would use one standard for entering into the form of analysis and then use another standard for the, like a fetus, for example.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea.
Thank you, Naomi Chancer. Appreciate that.
I don't understand the. I don't understand the line of inquiry. It feels like we're on one end, you're hitting at the idea that, it feels like you're asking me this question. If I see a person in public and they talk like a man, they look like a man, they act like a man, and then you say, isn't it strange that you determine that that person's a man, but at birth you have to see their dick? Isn't that hypocritical? That sounds like what you're saying. Like, for a normal person, I'm assuming they're conscious based on a set of behaviors, but I'm assuming that those behaviors are proxying something happening in the brain. If I were to later find out that the underlying brain things didn't exist, I might feel differently about the behaviors, like they're a doppelganger or a robot or something. But just because I'm able to ascertain whether or not I think somebody's having a conscious experience because I'm using behaviors as a proxy for brain activity, I don't think that that necessarily means that all of consciousness is ad hoc to brain activity, and now when I'm analyzing brain activity in the womb, it's somehow some arbitrary thing and I should be still looking at behaviors. I just don't understand the line of inquiry.
I'm not saying that brain activity is entirely arbitrary. What I'm saying is that at the point of like let's say when you're at the street and you look at someone and you ascertain they're conscious, you're like, oh, there's someone walking down the street. You don't think, oh, that's a very complicated like machine that looks like a human. It's a synth or something walking down the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you have any reason to believe that. That's fair enough. But neither did any of the scientists essentially going into the neurological studies when we were attributing consciousness to brain states in the first place. So when we were reducing, like, essentially consciousness to these specific brain states, the whole point is that they used a form of behavioral analysis assumed those people were conscious and created these studies. So
Yeah, sure,
behavioral
but then
analysis is the
afterwards,
foundation.
but then afterwards, if we modify the brain, it seems we modify the brain state. We modify the conscious state, right?
Yes, I would agree.
So doesn't that seem that if we were to guess that, like, let's say that we assume that, like, wow, that guy's moving and his veins are throbbing, it must be some organ is pumping blood in his body. Maybe it's the heart. We just assume that without testing it. Then later on, we poke holes in the heart and we find out the blood doesn't pump as fast. Then isn't
Yeah.
it fair to say, like, oh, okay, well, that assumption was correct. The blood is probably circulating because of the heart.
Absolutely. In the same way, like if you give someone like a psychedelic drug and they were to report that it has affected their consciousness, like you work out what like chemical formula it is and you see how it affects the brain, then you know that it's going to have like a few different. Then you can work out. You can start basically through clinical trials, like working out what would be, like what chemicals might cause a psychedelic effect. Like where you can basically say, yeah, actually, don't take that acid unless you want to be tripping balls, right? Like, yeah, that's fair enough, and that I would 100% agree with that. But the only reason that we would like the whole point is that when we are basing off this, we would basically say based off people's like essentially behavioral responses in the first place. That's essentially all we have. Like in the sense like even when they report back to us in terms of language that their conscious experience has changed. Like let's say someone was to report back to you. Let's say the word you've gave them acid and they report back to you like nothing has happened, absolutely nothing has happened, but that behavior is entirely erratic. You're like, no, something has definitely happened, and they affirm to you nothing has happened. Will you believe them or the behavioral analysis?
Will I believe if what if I measure? Wait, say that one more time.
So you give someone a drug,
Yes.
right? They enter into a state like that you believe that's going to be like a hallucinogenic state.
They get high. Yeah.
They are, yeah. They take the drug. They say they're absolutely fine. Nothing's changed in their experience. Nothing's happened at all. But to you, their behaviors look like they're tripping balls. They're basically, or like I don't know, like that they've taken another drug and they're gurning their face off. Like, are you going to believe their behaviors or their report?
Believe it for what? Whether or not they are high. The fact of the matter, if they're higher.
Whether their conscious experience has changed or not.
I'd probably believe the behavior.
Right. Why?
Because the behavior indicates somebody who's high.
So the behavior indicates something about the conscious experience.
Yes.
But okay, so if we accept that the behavior indicates something about the conscious experience, I'm just wondering why it doesn't in the fetus.
Well, hold on. Indicating an altered state of conscious experience is not indicating whether or not something is conscious at all.
No, but it indicates like a causative effect upon consciousness, where we can
What
say
is he
that an external
arguing
stimuli has had an effect upon a being, and their altered behavior shows that a conscious
Sure, but the
experience
causative
has changed.
effect has to do with the drug that is interacting with a part of the brain, right? And I'm looking at a
Yeah.
fetus. I would be looking at that exact same part of the brain developing. No.
But I just don't understand. Like look at it like this: the whole point of you saying that the part of the brain is the part that has consciousness is because we first had these reports, and we've basically indicated, okay, people
Wait,
who
hold on.
have
When you say
consciousness.
reports, we're talking about different things here. Somebody self-reporting whether or not they're high is not relying on a self-report that somebody's conscious, right?
I mean, it's the same thing. It's in terms of behavioral analysis or reporting. It does not matter. It really
I don't
does
think
not.
we
And we're
require like somebody reporting to themselves saying, yes, I am conscious. I don't think we rely on that. No.
in terms of a neurological experiment, we absolutely do. Like, it would basically, what kind of conscious experience are you having? Like,
Or what
how
kind
do
of
you feel?
neurological experience are you? I'm pretty sure that most of these are going to be measured with just. Is it an EEG that you stick the electrodes on the head? I don't think we rely on the person to self-report their.
You can't measure a phenomenal experience with an EEG though, mate. Like, if I was to ask you, like what is the experience of red like? You can't give, and she just shows someone
Oh,
an
sure, I
experience.
understand that. Yeah, I guess I'm just not sure what kind of neurological experiments you're talking about. I guess.
I guess the point I'm saying is that, like, I'm assuming that this whole thing relies upon having a qualitative experience of a certain kind, which seems to be indicated to us through behavioral analysis, which is why we construct certain examinations of the brain in the first place, which is why I attribute certain parts of the brain and certain qualities to parts of the brain in the first place. But then when it gets down to that behavior analysis, like prior to a certain point of fetal development,
I think it's trying to say that fetuses have quote-unquote behaviors, and therefore if you infer behavior to consciousness in people, the fetus should be no different. Yeah, but you infer you infer behaviors in things without brains. He's almost describing anosognosia. Someone who isn't self-aware of something about themselves. For example, someone is blind but deny that they are blind. I guess because there's a hard problem of consciousness, we might as well throw up our hands and say, well, if fetus is conscious, so don't abort. I feel like abortion as an ethical issue, or as something that presents an ethical dilemma, I think is something that should be taken seriously. But it seems like the conversations always go to pretty thoughtless extremes that sort of arrest the capacity to have conversations about it. That's my primary issue. I'm not saying it's a good point, I'm just saying that's the point he's making. Yeah. I don't know, he doesn't speak clearly, which I feel like as someone who has a tendency to speak in overly long sentences sometimes, typically because I'm kind of feeling my way through my thoughts as I'm speaking. I'm probably not one to talk, but Lewis is just, it's mind-numbing. He needs to think about what he actually wants to get across instead of just trying to seem smart.
And you start saying that the behavior is simply reactive, or even when it's not a pure reaction in the same way like a knee-jerk reaction, you'd still say that behavior doesn't indicate
rather than the Socratic Inquisition, why not just tell me what is your I see zero value in any of this inquiry. So I'm curious, what is your final point, or what do you want to wind up at for this?
Well, I guess I just want to know why, one, I think there's a point of why you were attributing a difference in consciousness to an animal and a human, to the point in which it is one is of such a radical different kind, a radically different kind.
The behaviors and the cognitive processes of humans seem to be of another kind, substantially different. The metacognitive processes of humans seem to be of a substantially different kind versus a dog or a cat. The ability to reflect on oneself, the ability to employ language that's a proxy for sophisticated concepts in the mind of time and space and everything, seem to be unique to humans versus animals.
Right, and you're saying that none of
concepts of time and space. You're getting into weird territory there, but okay.
Of that, and specifically, none of that is there. The specific human consciousness is there prior to 20 weeks. Even so, the difference between animals and humans is analyzed through behavioral proxies, which give an indication of what we would probably call phenomenal or existential.
Here's my immediate problem with this whole thing. He's talking about consciousness, but what he actually means is any kind of raw awareness. It's not clear to me that an infant has any of the stimulation that would be capable of producing something like consciousness. By consciousness, are we talking about simply the state of having a raw experience? In which case, we actually don't know how to locate that exactly. Or is you're almost in the territory of trying to identify mind as a substance at that point. Or and as a Hegelian, I'm kind of surprised he's not actually leaning into this a little harder. Are we talking about you having some degree of some kind of directed relationship with the world, such that you interact with it, it really interacts back with you, and you start to gain sort of an awareness of yourself as an interactant that way? Because that's how you would get something along the lines of consciousness, in the sense of sort of being aware of yourself and your place in the world, and the range of things you can do, your range of your freedoms, etc., stuff like that. See, that would be consciousness in a sense that would make sense to me from my understanding of where Lewis is coming from. But he's talking about consciousness as if it simply means just raw feels, and I don't see why, because even if you establish raw feels, right, that's not sufficient. Perhaps what Lewis is trying to do, though, is he's trying to kind of slip in a vegan argument here. He doesn't actually give a shit about abortion. Because that would get you some way to there if there's sort of this presumption that, oh, if you can identify like a first-person perspective of some kind of first-person experience, then therefore moral duties sort of attend that. So you can go like, well, if we agree that infants have conscious experience, or a fetus at like however many weeks has quote-unquote consciousness, well, look at this highly developed dolphin fetus, or look at this other animal that has a greater capacity out of the womb, etc., etc.
Existential differences between subjects. So like a human is having like an experience of like existential dread, where a dog is sort of maybe feels a bit anxious.
I'm gonna serious.
And you'd say that they are two different kinds of things.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And the reason that one is valuable and one isn't is why?
Where I have no idea. One is human, one isn't. I don't know where value ultimately comes from. I don't know.
Right. So but I'm just wondering, like, if we're just saying like one is human and one isn't, right? Why would it matter if, like, let's say the dog did have existential dread? Why would it matter to you?
I don't know, because there's probably going to end up being some metacognitive process that allows us to. I don't know. I'd have to think about it a lot. I'm not sure. They don't, so I don't think about it.
That's the thing. It's just because it seems like, really, it's kind of like when Trent basically pulled you up and he said, look, I think that the human side of things is basically so you don't have to give consideration of animals. And I think the consciousness side of things is so you don't have to give a consideration of zygotes and fetuses before a certain point of development. And all of this seems to be essentially arbitrary, because I mean, like let's be honest, you are a subjectivist, right? So, and it's coming from like your descriptions of your behaviors. So like, why, rather than look towards all of this sort of externality, why don't you just say like inwardly, I just feel different? Because that's what it boils down to, right?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, I think it's kind of where we're all at, but sure.
Yeah, I mean, let's say you're right, and let's say we're all at. Then why in the abortion debate, why do we have to relate it to the point in which there is, like, why couldn't you be saying yes, it's conscious, but it's not having a certain kind of consciousness? And then why would you not be okay, like, in theory, right? Because let's be honest, right? Like, in theory, I think if I was to show you conclusively that humans up to the age of 3 do not have the kind of consciousness you're talking about, which probably isn't true, but let's just say it is. You would still not give a fuck. You still probably would not be okay with killing a 3-year-old. Like,
I mean, theoretically, probably, right? That's the singer position, right?
I don't know, dude. It's destiny. I would not bet money on that, or 3-year-olds for that matter.
Yeah, basically, yeah, it's Singer's position. Yeah, well, I think he's old one. I don't think he's new one. Like, let's say you probably wouldn't be okay with that, regardless, right? So the
Well,
whole
I don't know,
point
why
is,
not? I mean, it's not going to truly prove that babies are just like fucking black boxes of like input, output, stimulus behavior, or whatever, and they're not having any kind of experience at all. I mean, obviously, from a political or optics point of view, it would look different.
It's not what black boxes are, but whatever.
But I mean, like, I guess it'd be at that point the same as terminating a fetus, sure.
right? So you actually do see, right? That's the thing, because it seemed to me like it might just be that you feel differently about these things, not that you actually are considering this kind of conscious, like, is this kind of conscious experience having like an emotional impact on you where you go, hey, wait a minute, that's too much like me, I'm having an empathetic response?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, I would imagine respect for humans or any other life is coming from some sort of empathetic response to protect something that's like me or something that's having an experience like me. Carnivore extends that to humans. Vegan extends that to all sentient things, right?
Yeah, I think I mean, I would say that you could have it off pure reason, right? Like, you can't. Like, I think that there's arguments to be had, but I think for the sake of what, or rather than getting into the meta ethics of it, because I'll just be an absolute mess. I just really want to know where you're attributing value and what is essentially marking that distinction, because like likewise, if we invert that, then if I could argue, like, for example, that there is no reason to attribute a basic like input output experience to dogs, cats, dolphins, chimpanzees, whatever, and instead we have just as much reason to believe that they have belief states, pattern recognition, like, or recognition of behaviors, they're capable of discerning aspects of their environment and changing their behaviors in the same way that human infants would. I'm just wondering, would that still carry over? Would you still go, oh, wait a minute, okay, that level of sophisticated consciousness now in an animal would mean that I would be vegan?
Potentially, sure.
Oh,
Right, okay.
it's a vegan
So
debate.
let's just talk about, well, why would you say that the dog, cat, chicken, pig, whatever, specifically, doesn't have this level of consciousness?
Here we go.
They don't exceed, or they
It's
don't
a
seem to
vegan
have
debate.
any of the proxies that I would use to measure for it.
There's a
Like unable
con.
to employ language. They don't seem to be self-reflective. Like there's just no way for me to see that type of conscious experience that they're having.
So you're saying, like, in terms of the consciousness experience they're having, there's no way for you to perceive it, right? How would you perceive the conscious experience of an adult or a human, like an adult human?
Well, I mean, I would assume if we have all the same brain structures, that their experience is probably identical to mine.
Right. I mean, one, why, and then two.
Well, why? Is because I would imagine the same emergent thing would come from the same underlying structures.
But I mean, like, why would you even like? It's
Yeah,
kind
so
of like
the
question begging, right? It's like this kind of brain is what produces consciousness, and only this kind of brain. Like it's like, and then if I ask why, you go because this kind of brain produces consciousness, and you go why because I assume that it does.
Well, I'm a big question beggar.
You can see why I would have. I'm just saying, like, it just seems that like you are doing what Trent said. I think Trent really did get you right, to be honest. It's just that you are
Maybe
saying
did,
that there is.
possibly. Yes, true. I agree.
Well, I don't know what to say, man.
I mean, this is literally why I say that we just value humans, because I don't think that we can explain why we value human consciousness or anything else like that.
What are you talking about, Tom?
That it's just human, and we're social animals, so we value other humans. At least the ones around us. We don't value all humans, but the ones that we do value, we want everybody else to value them.
Thank you for that. That actually contributed nothing. Thank you for that, Tom.
Huh?
What kind of humans don't you value, Tom?
I don't value any of the ones that I don't know.
Really?
But I value my family and my friends, and I want everybody else to value them and the government to value them and give them rights so that they can continue to exist. I'm a little confused, though, perspective philosophy. You're saying that you're not an epiphenomenalist, but it sounds like you're making an epiphenomenal argument where it's like intelligence, consciousness, memory determined by qualia. But if that's not what you believe, what do you believe then?
I'm actually a Catholic.
So you believe in a soul?
I believe in a soul. Yeah, I mean, I'm an Aristotelian, so I'd say that the unifying principle of a human being, or sentient being, a sentient creature, is they're having a psyche. So, like,
what?
Your psychological experience is part of what it means to essentially have a unified experience of your environment. Like for example, I don't see a reason to distinguish
What the hell is he
between a
saying?
human consciousness and an animal consciousness in terms of basic awareness, like qualia, like Destiny said. I don't see a reason why we would do that.
But
We
why
might
would
have
you-
different ways of engaging with the environment, like.
But why would you assimilate them either? Why would you say that they're the same thing? Or the same kind even? Why would you do that? Like, there are elements of human consciousness that are dependent on are sort of discursively interacting with our environments in a specifically intelligent, linguistic way. Like, there are animals that seem to do that, but there are a lot of animals that seem not to.
Thomas Nagel's point, like, I don't know what it's like to be a bat. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that the bat doesn't have a conscious experience that's analogous to the conscious experience of a dolphin, a chicken, a pig, a human. It's just a different kind of the same thing, mediated through different sort of senses and different like organs, which essentially give it different information about the same thing. It's aware of information. That's basically what consciousness is.
How do you get around being Catholic and God making animals taste good?
Because he also allows us to be tempted and tells us that we
What?
shouldn't be bad boys.
So every single animal in the animal kingdom that God's created eats other animals except for humans?
Yeah, I mean, we're the only ones. Like the whole point of the Christian narrative is to say that there is a big distinction between animals and humans, and that's
No, it's
rational.
not.
But why do
That's like
animals line up like in such a perfectly healthy way with like the human diet?
how do that? Like they definitely do not. What do you mean?
What do you mean they
Absolutely
definitely
do.
do
The
not?
nutritional profiles you
What do you mean they definitely do not? You get so much nutrients from animal meat. You get so much nutrients from eggs. Like you have eggs in the morning, you're like awake. It's like little chicken vitamins. They're massively nutritious. Also a lot easier to digest. What the hell is he talking
get
about?
from consuming meat is like vastly superior to. You have to do like a pretty complicated dance of vegan diets and supplementation and shit to get the same type of nutrition that you would from just eating
Not
meat.
really. Like not really. Like I think like in terms of a vegan diet, the only things that you have to supplement in the contemporary era really is B12 and vitamin D. Vitamin D you'd normally get from the sun. B12, the sources of B12 are dependent upon like how we think that we might have got them from water supplies, dirt, essentially like the way in which you get B12 is like a microorganism in the first place. It just so happens to essentially collect in the gut of a ruminant. So it's not like, and even then, like when you're looking at where we would be getting our sources of B12 prior to this, like I don't think it's fair to say that a vegan diet couldn't be just as healthy. And also, we don't seem to have the like. Look at it, man. Like
vegan diets can be as healthy, but it's substantially more complicated to try to like get the same sorts of like, for instance, essential amino acids. You've got to mix a ton of different types of food to match that, or like you just said, B12 supplementation.
you could just
Like,
eat walnut.
You can't just eat walnuts. What do you mean you just eat walnuts?
Sorry, and omega 3s and 6s. Sorry, not amino acids. Amino acids isn't hard at all. Actually, I mean, like amino acid profiles, you can eat like I'm not one for whole protein kind of bollocks anyway, because I think it's basically a myth. But even if you did, you can eat beans and rice will give you a 1.1 amino acid profile, so it exceeds beef. So like
Absolutely not true. But
black beans and brown rice will exceed beef in terms of amino acid distribution.
why was Jesus feeding people with fish? If you're not supposed to.
Oh,
I think one, there is the ethics of 2,000
it's God. It's God fish. He made the fish out of thin air, so it's okay.
years ago, and I think Jesus now would be vegan. And two, I would say that there is the
What do you mean Jesus now would be vegan? Catholics believe the communion wafers literally turn into the flesh of Christ. You actually can't perform the Eucharist without engaging in anti-vegan action.
there's loads of stuff. I mean, there's like depending on how you understand what was going on in the Bible, like Jesus never said anything about slavery. Yet most Christians would say slavery was wrong, wouldn't we? Because the ethics that he teaches indicates that this behavior was wrong. Whether
Hold
it
on,
was right
unfortunately, weren't there
2,000 years
literally,
ago.
I'm pretty sure, like in Deuteronomy and stuff, there are guidelines to owning slaves, are there not? So the Bible does
Yeah,
mention.
Old
it. I don't
Covenant,
believe the
Old
Bible
Covenant,
mentions
but whatever.
anything ever at all about veganism, does it?
Well, there's the covenant. There's the God's covenant with the animals. There's our stewardship.
You gotta have
Um,
kosher food.
Yeah, and like the fact
And
that
also,
all
when Jesus
plants
fed
are
people
halal
with fish,
eaten.
why wouldn't he just create black beans and rice? Like the fish weren't. He started with 4 fish and he ended with 1,000 or whatever.
Someone
right? Why
handed
wouldn't
it.
he create-
One thing is that someone handed him the fish. Like it's not like.
Sure,
But
why
even
not
if
turn
Jesus
it
went,
God was limited. He like. Come on, kids. Seriously? Like, I'm God. You're bringing me fish here. Like, where's your ethical sense?
went and
into-
caught the fish,
If the little boy with his basket of food had brought him beans, it would have been Jesus feeds the 5,000 with beans, and they all would have been just massively disappointed.
even if Jesus went and caught the fish, there is two things to be said, right? One, he's God, right? The whole point, like I hate to evoke divine command theory, but if God comes down and manifests nature, right? Nature and the whole point for Christians is to be for the good of God.
Yeah, but you're also supposed to imitate Christ, so it doesn't really work. Also, like, Christ may be God on certain reads of Christianity, but that doesn't mean he's also not a man. Like, there's a reason why he still performed the Passover, for example, despite the fact that God was not delivered from the Egyptians in Exodus.
So the fact that like Jesus has made nature for himself and for the well, for like for the good of God, right? For the good of the Trinity, if you could say, it means that like essentially like if it was for the good in that situation, it was for the good. Like if it was what God wanted, it is the good. Like tautologically for Christians, like even if like for example like I can command someone to go and murder their son, it will be wrong. If God commands someone to go and murder their son, that is a story we teach our children. Like, it's not the same thing.
Okay, I feel like I don't know.
What was the point of that? Thank you, Naomi Chance, for the $5. If perspective philosophy is If perspective philosophy is God's strongest soldier, then we are all doomed to eternal damnation. I guess by implication, though, eternal damnation would smell like barbecue.
I don't know how. Yeah, I guess. I mean, if you're religious, you're already doing like tremendous leaps of faith, I guess, to make that worldview work. But the fact that you would
It's a
take,
gold thing.
well,
What is
I mean,
that?
you are.
What is that? What is
But then the fact that you would take like the fact that the Bible has zero mention whatsoever of any sort of vegetarian, vegan, anything, and you're trying to read through this that you can still be a vegan or vegetarian while being Catholic, is
What are you talking
why
about?
would-
The
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I bet he's gonna say that example.
the Catholic Catechism says that we should not cause needless suffering or
Never mind.
to animals, and that we should neither suffering or death to animals, and that the use of animals is basically tied to the human good. And the human good, like let's look at even scripture on this. Noah's being given animals to eat in the first place was the human need because the world had been flooded. There wasn't anything else to eat. And even how you interpret that, it might be even more limited, that only certain things like eggs and stuff were actually meant to be consumed at that point. But it depends upon translation. So like the way in which scripture works in towards animals, like animals have been made with a manifest end goal, which we
What?
could see through a consideration of natural law. They have a telos.
What? What do you mean they have a natural? What do you mean they have a natural end goal? Dude. Like, have you even... Is this guy even, like... Like, this fails, like, Kant's critique of teleological thinking. This is how basic this is. No, there's not a manifest end goal. What do you mean a manifest end goal? Why? Because they're alive? You can't infer an end goal from an organism as an explanation of it when you're just restating the fact of the organism. Ugh.
And God said that is good, and he gave us the role to consider that good in our day-to-day lives. So like, don't pollute rivers, don't fucking destroy the rainforest and the ocean and that.
Oh,
It's
what's
only
this?
the only reason that we're in this situation is because essentially like the Protestant reformers interpret it very harshly in the first place with the cultural mandate, but it sort of got polluted over time. It got like diluted over time, where like it's just do what the fuck you want in
why
nature
would the
for
Pope
human
not
good.
just come out and make a statement on this, and then clear
Well,
it all
I mean,
up?
like I don't think I'm not saying that I'm the standard doctrine in terms of Catholicism. I'd say I'm heterodoxical.
I
I'm
would
not the
say so
norm.
too.
I don't think the average Catholic is going to affirm
Hold on,
veganism,
wait, I might
but
be
I
a
think
total idiot. Can you be a heterodox Catholic?
Of course you can.
yeah.
What does that mean? So, like, do you not
It just
believe
means
that
that,
you're
the
an
Pope
apostate.
is making statements on matters of biblical scholarship or matters of like divine command or whatever, that the Pope is not infallible? Or
Well, it's not to say that there's how we understand the infallibility of the Pope, but also there's basically what makes you a Catholic is your affirmation is like 4 pillars of Catholicism. There's like the creed, there's the Our Father, there's the I'm trying to remember them off the top of my head now. There's the creed, there's the Our Father, Faith Catholic. Oh shit, that's just like totally evading us. Creed, the Our Father.
faith, sacraments, life in Christ, and prayer.
Yeah, sacraments, and yeah, basically. And as long as you affirm all of those in the same way, that would be like, for example, you affirm like the Catholic Trinity, the Apostolic Creed. You affirm, the sacraments, and you affirm these sort of basic structures, then you're a Catholic. And then there's a wide variety. There's huge amounts of debate within the Catholic Church. I mean,
Okay.
it's a huge, huge religion.
Okay, I've ended the poll. It's U1. Cosmic Skeptic, 33%. It doesn't count, though. People actually like him. I think Logo Daedalus is the funniest YouTube philosophy guy, but, you know, I've got a sophisticated taste for this kind of thing.
There was remember, like, there's the Scholastics were like some of the largest like debate bros in the fucking world ever. Like, there's like whole manuals on how to debate. So like we can have our own ideas.
So you do believe in like evolution, though, right?
Yeah, 100% believe in evolution. Yeah.
So how do you get a manifest teleology from animals? The entire point to evolution by means of a natural process is precisely that there isn't a benevolent super being that's molding the design of those creatures. That's the point. You don't have a telos. You have organisms that are adapting to their environment, altering their environment in the process. Their environment in turn changes and shapes them back to, and you have like the entire thing sort of changing by itself. You even get this in Hegel. Hegel recognized this. How the hell? What is he smoking?
Fucking idiot.
Do you deny
And
that?
like not even like in the weird book. I guess all Hegel's books are weird, but like you literally get an explanation of this in the phenomenology of spirit.
Like our bodies
what
are
is it?
like
Hold on,
made
wait.
to eat meat throughout
Yeah, wait, what is
evolution.
this? Genesis 9:3. Okay, I'm just reading Bible verses now. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you
Yeah.
all things. Every moving thing. Yeah.
That's
No, like literally. I think is it Peter? Hang on. There's like New Testament, right? Not people in the desert. People who have some options. Let's see here. I think it's in the Acts. Because I think Peter has a vision. I think on a roof. I think he's like sleeping on a roof or something. Hang on, give me a sec. It's been a long time. Because I think this is before the conversion of Saul. Yeah, here we go. So Peter and Cornelius. So at Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion. This is actually the, not that it matters because it's pretty standard translation, but this is actually the Ignatius Press Revised Standard Version that's officially authorized by the Catholic Church, and it is gorgeous. But I digress. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort. This is Acts chapter 10. A devout man who feared God with all his household, gave alms liberally to the people, and prayed constantly to God. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly... Oh, sorry, Cornelius. My apologies. At about the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming in and saying to him, Cornelius. And he stared at him in terror and said, What is it, Lord? And he said to him, Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa and bring one Simon, who is called Peter. He is lodging with Simon, another Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside. The seaside is also called Peter. When the angel who spoke to him had departed, he called 2 of his servants and the devout soldier, also Peter, from among those that waited on him, and having related everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. Oh no, it is Peter who has the vision. Okay, sorry. The next day, as they were on their journey and coming home into the city, I'm almost done. Just bear with me. Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour, and he became hungry and desired something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance, and he saw the heaven opened up, and something descending like a great sheet let down by 4 corners upon the earth. Shia LaBeouf. In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, "No, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." And the voice came to him again a second time, "What God has cleansed you must not call common." This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up at once to heaven. Like, you know, Jesus would have been a vegan, though. Ugh, good God.
That's the story of Noah, which I brought up before.
No, that's the Adam and Eve. How are they both getting this wrong? That's Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve get, like, the fruits of trees for meat and whatnot.
It's essentially contextual to the specific point in which he was.
Why would he
given.
give him animals to eat? That's unethical. Can't God just make more vegetables?
God, like, I think, like, when we're talking about, you could basically see this with the problem of evil in general. Like, why doesn't God just solve all of the fucking problems in the world? Like,
No, it's not with the problem of evil in general. These aren't, like, this isn't a problem to be solved. This is a explicit design flaw. If God is a quote unquote vegan, if God has made a world where it is impossible to not eat meat, and if he has inspired a text that he then authorizes to be the representation of his will on earth, and it says eat meat, like, explicitly, over the protests of pious believers, I think the upshot is, where the hell are you getting the idea that your religion has any amenability to veganism? It's entirely the opposite. Like, entirely. No, it's not even a question about it. There's nothing vegan about Catholicism.
there are certain things which are morally acceptable in certain circumstances, which God has outlined, and then there are things which are not. And remember, I'm a Catholic. I think this is.
Is there any other example where God has like put forth, just like told somebody to go commit sin?
Well, yeah. I mean, he said, like, for example, we would normally outline that you shouldn't go to war. God has commanded war.
Well, it's not a sin.
Normally.
Wait, but are those wars righteously justified? Are you talking about like the Israelites and shit, or where like? Which...
Yeah, but in the same way that the war, in the same way that the killing of animals, right, in this situation is righteously justified.
Well, how is it justified when God could just provide you with vegetables? Like, that's different.
Well, why is it justified when God could have just not made those people? Like, what are you talking about? Like,
because my understanding is that
point.
Sin on the planet comes from humans turning their back on God, essentially. That you ate the apple, you got the knowledge, and now humans make choices on the planet where they turn their back from God, and that's where the sin cometh from. But that's different than God just giving you something and saying, go sin. There's a difference between like one man raping a woman and God giving you a Playboy magazine. If God gives you a Playboy, and I would say, well, why would God give you a Playboy? Isn't masturbation sinful? And then for you to say, well, don't men rape women? Like, that's sinful too, right? Well, that's different. In one, you've got two humans making poor decisions, which is where evil comes from. But then in the other, the source of the evil is God itself. That doesn't make any sense to me from a Catholic point of view.
But I'm not saying that. I'm saying that in one instance it's a sin, in one instance it's not, and that's based on contexts which God has outlined, which is essentially one was a point of need.
You haven't given me the context of why God wouldn't just give him corn.
Well, it's like the same reason why God just doesn't intervene divinely and give the Jews Israel. Like
no, hold on. You're playing a trick here. I don't know where you're doing this. I'm not giving you a circumstance where God has to intervene against other humans. There's just a one-on-one relationship between God and Moses. Why wouldn't God give Moses corn? I'm not talking about like why God wouldn't stop some other humans or help in a war or do human versus human conflict. This is just a one-on-one between God and Moses. Why wouldn't he just give him corn?
But what I don't understand is if we're talking about essentially what is a supernatural intervention, right? Like, God can intervene and do whatever the fuck he wants, right? That's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
He can manifest nature in any way, shape, or form that would as to conform with his will. Then the whole point is that there must be a reason he's not intervening here. Now, I'm saying that he's not intervening for the same reason, which is human free will, essentially.
Hold on, no, wait. You're obfuscating so much. No, this isn't about human free will or intervention. God could have given Moses corn. Right? Why would he just not give Moses corn? This isn't about like Moses surviving in the wilderness or whatever. This is just things.
Well, he gave him manna, didn't he? I think he only gave him like the quails when they rebelled because they were tired of the manna, which was like a weird flaky thing on the ground.
that God could give Moses? Why couldn't he just give him a ton of vegetables?
One, like, I think, like, I hope you understand that. One, I don't think this is literal. Like, I'm not a fundamentalist. I don't think the Bible is literal. I think this is allegory.
Okay, well, hold
Well,
on.
hang on. If it's allegory, then why are you relying on these examples as if they're paradigmatic? That doesn't make any sense.
If it's allegorical, that hurts your argument even more, because in an
Yeah, I know.
allegory, would it not make more sense for God to give him vegetables to show the goodness in eating from the lands and having a kind dominion over animals? God provided Moses
No.
with 2 of every animal so that mankind got a peaceful dominion over animal, and then gave him vegetable to eat from?
Not at all, because if you look at the structure of the story, Eden is a
I gotta say, like, I like Destiny in this debate because it's not something he's bullshitting his way through. Like, he's not particularly good on the quotations, but that's fine. Neither am I. It's been a long time since I've spent any significant amount of time reading it. But like, there's actual, like, a fluid conversation going on here. Lewis is just completely facile. It's painful. I don't know how he doesn't see it.
essentially a bloodlust domain in
Oh
which
my God.
animals only ate from humans only ate from trees. And then after that, sin enters the world. God has to divinely intervene in order to crush out sin. And humans are left on a boat with only animals to eat and can eat animals only in that circumstance. So what it shows is essentially humans have a responsibility to themselves that doesn't apply to animals, but humans also have a responsibility to animals in general. So it's not like you can eat animals in general, I don't care. It's that in this select circumstance, you can eat animals, which shows that human morals are constrained to specific circumstances which are being outlined in the scripture.
Okay, I feel like we're... Okay, this seems really goofy, but all right.
That's fine. Like, I'm happy to... I mean, look at it like
reminds
this.
me
Like,
of, it
this
reminds me
isn't-
of like when people make the argument that like the United States is expressly and specifically like a Christian nation, and despite the fact that like our founding fathers were all like the main the main character and wrote a ton and so much, and we've got the Declaration, we got articles, we've got the Constitution, we've got so many things. For some reason, all of them were too stupid to ever write at any specific point.
I'm surprised perspective philosophy has done a PhD. My understanding is he abandoned it. He didn't finish.
The U.S. is a Christian nation. They never wrote it. I don't know why they wouldn't write that. And I feel similar with the Bible. We've got the whole Bible. We've got all these councils in Nicaea, all these different books, everything. At no point, why doesn't somebody just write, "And thou shalt not eat meat"? Like, why can't that be Commandment 11 or whatever? Like, it just seems like it would be
That's the
such an
same reason
obvious
there's
important
not
thing.
the same reason why it took a while forward to affirm that slavery was wrong. Look, like the way that
What?
the way in which the
What?
Christian faith develops is that it develops. Like, the living tradition moves alongside it, and as we become more rational and we understand what is right and wrong more clearly, we develop in light with that with the light of reason. Like, it's like, would you rather we be a dumb bunch of monkeys who rely upon only what people said previously?
But that's what actually happened, though. It took thousands of years to go against slavery. Thousands of years of Christians enslaving other human beings, not treating them like people, creating a epic backlog of resentment interculturally to the point where entire countries regarded Christianity as hostile because it was overbearing and being used to insidiously influence nations at a political and cultural and not merely a level, and not merely to save their souls or whatever. Like, if what's the point of divine revelation if it doesn't actually reveal anything? If it just like says, "Oh, here's a little nudge, you random dissenters in Rome. In 2,000 years, you'll figure out that you shouldn't engage in chattel slavery, but you'll still be in favor of like marital rape for hundreds of years after." Like, you see how dumb this is. It's like, what are you for then? What's the point? Ugh.
I mean, the books of the Bible are the books of the Bible. There might be some... I mean, we might reinterpret to make it fit our modern day life, but not eating animals is a pretty big thing. If that was supposed to be like in the original...
So's not
Patch
having
House.
slaves. So's not having slaves yet. It
No.
wasn't like...
They're fine with slaves. It's fine with slaves. The Bible's fine with slavery. Why would it be concerned with slavery? It's concerned with the status of your immortal soul. God flooded the earth and killed all of the animals, excepting 2 of each kind. Clearly, they were not that valuable in his estimation as far as the biblical account is concerned. There are visions given to apostles and other relevant people telling them to literally eat animals over their protests. What? This is just silly. Like, he's just making shit up.
Written, don't have slaves.
I feel like slavery was something that was explicitly allowed in the Old Testament. Were there guidelines for treating slaves? Am I wrong about that?
Yes.
Yeah, but
Not
one of the
along,
biggest
so-
points is to say that like slavery would be wrong according to most Christians now against Christians.
Doesn't matter. And so what do you mean against most Christians now? Like, you're kind of laying bare that even now it's not definitive at all. I mean, for God's sake, Lord's Resistance Army, right? They were not averse to slaves. It's just, he's not doing slavery apologetics. He's affirming that slavery is bad, but like, you can't just say, oh, well, we figured out it's bad additionally after, the Renaissance and thousands of years of intercultural penetration and mutual influence. Therefore, God was anti-slavery in the Bible all along. That doesn't make any sense. You can't just attribute literally any single development that we anoint with the term, like, this is the moral position nowadays, to the Bible because it played some ambiguous cultural role in generating that conclusion. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Christianity, like in terms of how we understand Christianity, we'd say that Christian ethics forbids having slaves.
No, it doesn't.
And
No, it doesn't. There are people with slaves encountered by the apostles, and they are not chastised for it. This is not the case. This is just incorrect.
in relation to the America being Christian, kind of. I mean, there was like America, like the whole point is that the founding fathers were liberals, right? Let's be frank. Well, mostly liberals, but they were liberal Christians. They believed that you had to come to Christ.
No, they weren't.
Where
oh,
you'd
oh shoot, I lost the spot. Oh, thank God. I guess we can just call it now. We're 2.5 hours in, and it's like 1 a.m. They weren't all liberal Christians. Some of them were, most of them were some type of deist. I think, was Benjamin Franklin? I think Benjamin Franklin was basically an atheist. Hang on, unless I'm mistaken. Benjamin Franklin religion. No, he was a deist. Let's see, founding fathers. Oh, who was it? Was it the one who had the musical? My brain is just not working today. Founding fathers religion. Because I thought. Let's see. Hamilton. Not sorry, that's who I'm thinking of. Never mind. Well, wasn't he an atheist? Hang on. Maybe I'm misinformed. One of them was an atheist. Hang on. I was sure of it. Because I know Jefferson was religious. Maybe I've conflated Benjamin Franklin's deism with atheism in my head from back in the day when I conflated the two. Jefferson had the Jefferson Bible where he removed all forms of supernatural influence. Right. Anyways, I'm going to call it here, guys. I'm massively tired. I will stream tomorrow. we're going to wade back into it. If you appreciate what I do, I'll make myself bigger for this. If you appreciate what I do and you want to help me support the channel, there's a Patreon link in the description. I will make sure the Cathedral link is fixed if it's not working right now. And I'll see you tomorrow. I'm not entirely sure what we're doing. We may go short as well. It depends on how exhausted I am. But take care. Let me see if I can't send you to anybody if someone's streaming right now. Let's see. Who can we redirect you to? Tomfoolery's live. Should I send you to Tomfoolery? I don't really want to. Who else? Is Vosh up? Still can't send to Vosh. Need to figure that out. I think Annie might have been messing with that, but we'll see. Who's streaming right now? I guess it's just Tomfoolery, so I guess I'll just send you there. Yeah, looks like it. Okay. Just give him hell for me because he's a dummy. Ciao.